Good afternoon, everybody. Please feel free to continue to grab food, grab beverages while we have the conversation. We appreciate all of you being here today and those attending online. What we wanted to do today was really provide Congressman Waltz an opportunity to talk about his new book, Hard Truths. We'll do that without a doubt. And I think it's a unique opportunity and a tremendous insight. We're honored to have you with us today, Mike. And for those that are unfamiliar, it's the case that sure, without a doubt, that he needs no introduction, but I think it's useful to remind those of you that aren't familiar with the career that in many ways is reflected inside of the book. Retired Colonel of the National Guard, first Green Beret elected to Congress, former White House Pentagon policy advisor, small business owner, and accomplished author of now, this is your third book?
Two big books and one children's book.
One children's book, which counts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hard Truths, Think and Lead Like a Green Beret. Served his country his entire life, graduated from, this is my editorial comment, the finest military school in the world. Served 27 years, U.S. Army in the National Guard, retiring after his second term in Congress. After being commissioned as a lieutenant, he graduated from Ranger School, selected to join, more editorial, the nation's most elite fighting force as a Green Beret, serving worldwide as a Special Forces officer, multiple combat tours in Afghanistan, the Middle East, and Africa, recognized combat veteran, highly decorated with 4 Bronze Stars, 2 of them for valor. Experiences as a soldier and policy advisor inspired him to write his first book, Warrior Diplomat, a Green Beret's battles in Washington and Afghanistan, which we'll hear more about. The proceeds of which also, so that you know and are encouraged to go do that, especially as we get into the holiday season, go to the Matthew Pacino Foundations and the Green Beret Foundation.
And the proceeds from Hard Truths will go to the Pacino
So
Foundation.
if you needed yet another reason to buy this book and other copies for your friends and loved ones, you have it now. He also wrote the children's book, as he mentioned, Dawn of the Brave, a Christian children's book. It teaches children the importance of service, which we'll certainly talk about as well. Following his time in the White House, he built a small business with over 400 employees, repeatedly listed as one of the fastest growing private companies in America. As chairman of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Readiness, a member of House Oversight and Accountability Committee, House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and he's championed legislation to restore the military back to merit-based and mission-focused. He's joined the House China Task Force of 15 Republican lawmakers representing 14 committees of jurisdiction to coordinate policy on China, which we'll certainly talk about, and sponsored legislation to reduce American reliance on Chinese critical minerals, pioneered legislation to secure American universities and academies from Chinese espionage, and done a great bit to restore our naval supremacy and our maritime capacity and capability. And as a strong advocate for school choice and return to civics and education near and dear to our hearts here at Heritage, and he's championed the growing space industry at Florida's Space Coast, the science, technology, engineering, and math programs at Florida's colleges and universities. And he's also married to, dare I say, your better half, because I know Julie and served with her at the White House and the National Security Council.
Like 90%. 90. Yeah.
Also a combat veteran and someone who has committed a great deal of her life to service, as have members of her family, and was a Homeland Security Advisor on the National Security Council, Homeland Security Council, the White House. So please join me in welcoming Representative Waltz today.
Thank you, Rob. I'm going to bring you back down to Florida on the campaign trail. Very nice.
I'm happy to do so, compliant with our 501c3 status for lawyers in the room.
Yes.
What I wanted to do today to give a glimpse of what's in the book, which is due out now, I think, in a week and a half, or is it now might be down to a week. But you can pre-order.
Yeah, next week, but you can pre-order.
We're out next week, and what I'd like to do is allow you to give everyone here and dialing in a sense of what's in the book. I want to start with why, because I think that guides the sort of rest of the book. I think in many ways it helps understand your commitment to service and what you've accomplished. Early on in the book, I think you get to find out why, at least my interpretation, right? And you say in here, because I've served in so many difficult places around the world, I have a clear vision of what America is and what she's called to be. Those experiences have strongly reinforced my belief that the principles of limited government, individual liberty, personal responsibility, free markets, equal opportunity, and a strong national defense. And if I'm right, and if that's the sort of greater why, how has that shaped the formation of this book and your attempt to let others learn from your path?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for doing this. Thank you to Heritage. Thank you for everybody coming. I'm really thrilled to actually see some younger faces here as well that are engaged in these issues. And it was really that why. There were two whys. That one, which was, as a warrior diplomat, as we call ourselves in the Green Berets, and I'll explain ourselves why in a second, that we are kind of the ambassadors and emissaries all over the world, but it's places where we normally wouldn't have a typical Foreign Service, State Department ambassador or emissary in the, with the tribes of Afghanistan or valleys of Africa or out in the hinterlands across the Middle East, and yet we have to live and espouse those values and abide by those values in some of the toughest places in the world, dealing with some pretty murderous, sometimes, individuals and getting them in line with our values but our interests. Sometimes they don't reflect those values, but we have to walk that fine line because they're still in line with our interests. And I've always found that dynamic to be something unique that Green Berets have to deal with. The other why is I was asked in a high school group one time, early on, right after I'd been elected, I think she was a 9th grader, stood up and said, "Can you explain to me the difference between Green Berets, SEALs, and Rangers? Like, I hear these terms, but I don't understand." And then once I explained that to her, she said, "Well, I have a follow-up question. How do you apply those attributes to what you're doing now in Congress?" I was like, okay. And my first thought was, well, let me explain, give you my answer. I said, do you remember, and she was old enough to remember the Osama bin Laden raid in 2011, so that, the U.S. Navy SEALs, SEAL Team 6, their most elite unit, went around the world, found an individual working with the CIA and our intelligence community that we have been looking for over a decade, Osama bin Laden, and in the middle of the night, in a quasi-frenemy country in Pakistan, put 2 bullets on a forehead and got everybody out and killed the leader of Al-Qaeda. The SEALs and the U.S. Army Rangers are the best of the world at doing that. I never want to get in a gunfight with a SEAL anywhere near the water or a boat or anything else, right? Green Berets are a bit different. We have to specialize in regions of the world. We have to learn multiple languages. We have to learn the local culture and often blend in. And you'll take just no more than a dozen of us, sometimes as small as 3 or 4, and embed us with a militia, a partner military force, a paramilitary organization, and we have to buy with and through. You can take just 3 or 4 of us and we'll train 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 of them to kind of work alongside our nation's interest or in the direction of our nation's interest for us. So an easier way to say it is the SEALs and Rangers find our enemies and do bad things to bad guys. We find our friends and have them do bad things to bad guys for us and try to work ourselves out of a job by, with, and through our local allies. And so she was like, "How does that apply to Congress?" I said, "Well, I got to tell you, so far, the tribes of Afghanistan sometimes seem a lot easier than the tribes of the swamp and the tribes of D.C., but building those coalitions, finding common ground, aligning our interests, and achieving an objective, there's a lot of traits that I think you need to do that. And we're very alone often. We're very afraid often because sometimes these warlords would assume kill us as they would the bad guys if we get cross with them. I started kind of capturing those stories in combat, and then how have we applied them here to this kind of national conversation?
You mentioned adaptation. It's a theme throughout the book. It's intrinsic in assessment qualification, Ranger School as well. You've got to adapt to succeed. And you get to the remote areas of Afghanistan, Africa, other parts of the world, you've got to adapt. And is that one of the ways, or one of the areas in which you thought uniquely prepared you to succeed in an environment like Congress, because you had to adapt to that circumstance in order to prevail?
Yeah, two of the anecdotes very quickly, I'll try to get through quickly. One, I talk about how we embedded with speaking of being kind of alone and sometimes afraid. And one of my tours, there were 3 of us, just 3 Americans, embedded with a task force of 90 Arabs of both Jordanian and UAE, so an allied task force, but we were kind of providing a lot of the intelligence, the close air support, the direction. So 3 of us, 90 Arabs, partnered with 180 Afghans, and we were out there. I mean, closest I'll get to Lawrence of Arabia ever, because whatever I could convince them to do, we did. And if I never eat goat again, I'll be fine, because we were just out there living off the land. In terms of adaptation, in one of those missions, we were looking for a senior Taliban commander, heavily partnered with Al-Qaeda. The Australian Special Air Service, their commandos, literally had sniper teams sitting up on mountains, defecating in plastic bags. They were suffering up there, and we were very worried they would get compromised. And if you remember the movie The Lone Survivor, that was a SEAL team, sniper team that got compromised and then caused all kinds of follow-on damage. And we kind of looked at the situation and said, well, let's try something different. We set up a medical clinic near one of the Taliban commanders' hide sites. We got local Afghan doctors, we got the local Afghan police involved. We ended up treating over 3,000 villagers, but as they were being treated, we were taking their biometrics and taking their photos, and lo and behold, if some son of a gun that we'd been looking for didn't turn up to get some medical treatment. Once he figured out, he stepped into the treatment room and we snapped his photo, he tried to get out of there. My Green Berets went to go get him. We stopped them and said, no, no, no. And we called the local police chief who was on standby for him to arrest him. And we got the guy. Now, what did we do? One, we prevented our snipers from getting compromised and causing, all kinds of follow-on kind of Black Hawk Down type missions. We treated 3,000 villagers. The local village chief was thrilled with us. The Afghan doctors and health department looked great. And the police chief, who was actually a good guy, looked like the hero. And we did all of that blending into the background, by, with, and through our locals, right? And then I got the little pat on the back. I went and got to go tell the Australian commander, you can pull your guys back now. We got them, right? So that's kind of adaptation. And then I'll just try to tell you another quick anecdote. And this one is really stuck with me over the years. I had a tribal elder, militia commander. He had about 1,500 of his militia that were kind of on the fence. They were armed to the teeth. The cash crop in the area was pine nuts. I've literally never been able to eat pine nuts the same way again, because they literally would get in massive tribal firefights over this cash crop. And I want him working with us. I mean, my teeth had turned brown. I drank so much tea with this man over the course of a year. And about halfway through kind of our relationship, he kept talking about this secret weapon, Oh, Commander Mike, once we build out this secret weapon, we're going to defeat the extremists. This is how we're going to take them down. Eventually my intelligence guys were like, look, sir, we can't keep giving this guy cash and training and whatever. We know, has he got a cache of stingers? Does he have some special Iranian landmine? Like, what is it? Long story short, I finally kind of called him the carpet and said, you got to show me this secret weapon. I need to see it right now or this relationship's over. Okay, Commander Mike, okay. He sends his lieutenant back. I hear a bunch of rustling. I'm looking at my guys. I don't know what he's going to bring out. You know what walked out? His 2 daughters. They come out. I had never seen a woman in this part of Afghanistan outside of a burqa. They were beautiful, hair flowing, standing tall and proud. This elder was completely illiterate, but wise. And he said, this is the secret weapon, Commander Mike. He was sending his daughters, smuggling them over to India to get trained, one as a doctor and one as a lawyer. And it was kind of, we all know Malala Yousafzai and her story, the Pakistani girl who was shot in the face for going to get an education. So the thing they fear the most are these women. And it just really kind of imbued into me that girls' education, women's empowerment, it's not just a humanitarian issue. It pulls the rug out from under the extremist war of ideas. And he said, we get an army of these women, and they're marching in Tehran, and they're marching in Islamabad, and they're marching in Kabul. I'll take that over one of your divisions any day, right? And it just really sunk home for me, and I've since become co-chair of a Women's Empowerment Caucus here, and that in societies where women are thriving, in civil society and politics and in business and in their society, extremism doesn't mean it's eliminated, but it's not dominant, and it's something we have to get behind. So that kind of thinking is and using those different levers is kind of a Green Beret approach, and something that is beat into us during our training, which is much longer and much more psychologically intensive than your typical military kind of elite special operations training.
I know those creative solutions are important. I think there's a lot of Iranians that would agree with that exact same sentiment and what that elder was doing in remote Afghanistan. Creative solutions critical, adaptation important, so too is determination. You give a number of different examples again. What's great about the book is you don't just get the principles without the sort of, not just the theoretical, but you get the vignettes and the examples like we've heard in innumerable cases to bring this home and to show the reader how Mike has been able to apply these things in military service, but also then back in Washington in a different context. And some of these same principles apply. How would you characterize determination, and in which ways has that made the difference between success and failure for you?
Yeah, well, and I just want to touch on the adaptability. You mentioned the Iranians, and I would never put the Quds Force or the IRGC in the same bucket as our special operations, but they're one of the few militaries that takes a somewhat similar approach. They're a Quds Force with a relatively small footprint in terms of a force multiplier, right? They are training, arming, assisting, and advising Hezbollah, and look at the damage they're doing, and Hamas, and look at the damage they're doing, and the Houthis, and I mean, shut off now, 70–80% of global shipping through the Suez Canal with a relatively small, inexpensive footprint. They're taking that by, with, and through approach, even over in South America, in the Triangle, and other places. So they're able to have an outsized effect with a relatively small investment, a huge return on that investment. So, taking that here in Washington, D.C., I once asked, and I tell the anecdote, a very senior official in the Air Force who was kind of pounding the table for more B-21s said, look, I'm not opposed to stealth bombers. We absolutely need that capability. But what gets inside Beijing's thinking more? Or Tehran's thinking more? Another couple of stealth bombers, and which is a massive cost, or the potential of a Uyghur uprising, or another Hong Kong, or if we would actually get behind the Green Movement, or we just had the Masa Amini, talk about women's empowerment and the threat that is to an extremist ideology, the girl that was literally murdered by Iranian police for not wearing a hijab, that sparked nationwide protests. So the thing these dictatorial regimes fear the most, yes, of course, they're going to be deterred by hard power, but they fear their own people the most. And I'm not, for everybody streaming and watching, advocating regime change, but if we should be, as we were in the Cold War, fully advocating and supporting these dissidents who are fighting for the basic freedoms in line with our values. And there's a lot of ways, covertly and overtly, we could and should be doing that, in my view. And you talk about a return on investment. Determination, I mean, I talk about both determination and resilience, legendary Green Berets, and then even some that aren't as well known. One of my fellow captains lost in a firefight his eye, his arm, and his leg. And the system didn't know what to do with him, because the system has been conditioned to give him his disability, give him his payments, give him his prosthetics, and rightly so, they should. He didn't want any of it. All he wanted to do was get back to his team and get back to the fight. And what, I talk about in there, kind of what imbues that, where does that come from? And that's not to disparage anyone who has taken what they rightly deserve, but there is a kind of a different level of individual that has that level of determination and resilience. And I think those are the types of people we should be talking about and celebrating as a society. The old "my heroes wear camouflage, not capes." And then I tell another probably somewhat interesting story that any of our veterans or Rangers will appreciate. If you've gone through Ranger school, you know that starvation and sleep deprivation is a big part of the training. Can you, when your body is literally consuming itself, you haven't eaten in so long and you've only slept about maybe 30 minutes a night, conduct a mission to standard. It's a real gut check, especially when everybody else around you is in the same state. And I talk about discipline in that regard. We had run out of food. What they do is they say, hey, you're in charge. And they had said this to a buddy of mine of getting us our resupply. He got us lost, and we didn't get the resupply. Well, I had the discipline to keep a little packet of Skittles out of my MRE that I'd had the discipline not to eat. Sounds silly, but I thought I was the most disciplined, brilliant Ranger out there. And every kilometer that we were walking past there, I'd pop a Skittle in my mouth, and it was just an explosion of happiness and energy. And you know, about the third time I did that, I saw some of the other Ranger candidates looking at me, literally salivating, and I thought we were going to get in a fist fight over this pack of Skittles. And I looked at him and said, no, I had the discipline to save these things. You guys didn't. Suck it up. That's your fault. And popped another one in. It's like, get lost, guys. You know what? I forgot all about it, but at the end of the course, when you're decided if you passed or failed, I'll never forget standing in front of the sergeant, and I'd gotten a bad evaluation. You evaluate your peers from those two guys for not sharing, for being kind of a self-centered jerk. And what did that mean for what kind of a leader? And, you know, I pushed back. I was like, hey, those guys ate all their food on like day one. I spaced mine out. I'm better. And I'll never forget the sergeant saying, you know, you said in your psychological profile that you're a Christian, that you're a follower of Jesus Christ. And I said, yes, Sergeant, absolutely. And he said, well, let me ask you this. Big dip in his mouth. He said, what would Jesus have done in that situation? And I was like, oh, man. Like, man. I said, Sergeant, Jesus would have given them his entire pack of Skittles. You're right. He leaps up. Damn right I'm right. Don't you ever tell us sergeants are always right. And he's in my face, and spit going over, and I'm like, oh my God, I failed. And he said, I'm going to let you pass, but you remember, as a leader, because you've had enough self-discipline, you're expected to. More is expected of you. And when you've had that discipline, that's not just to take care of yourself, that's to take care of others. Whether it's as a Christian where you sacrifice for others, or whether as a leader where you sacrifice for your men, even when they've, and now women are going through Ranger School as well when they've fallen short. And so those kinds of, I don't know, you know, kind of solidifying your moral compass, those lessons are burned into your brain through that kind of training. And I think those are life lessons that anybody can apply now.
Well, if they're not already, I'm sure Skittles will be buying lots of your book, and it might even influence an ad campaign. And it probably doesn't need a lot of elaboration to draw the analogy to legislation, because I think you could transfer that immediately. That story could be told perhaps in a different way in the halls of Congress about something.
Well, I learned it on my campaign, and just 30 seconds, I got the call you never want to get that, hey, they're determined to flip your seat. Bloomberg, Soros, Pelosi super PAC have just dumped millions on you. We couldn't outspend them, so we just beat them on the ground, and we knocked 250,000 doors. And I popped a Skittle every successful engagement to keep me going. And then I'll never forget, sun's going down, day before the election, my last door, I said, this is it. God, after this, it's in your hands. And my last door was a Gold Star mom that had lost her son in Panama, and gave me a big hug. She said, I've seen all the negative ads, but I could tell that's not you. And she said, don't lose your mind up there, right? And don't lose your and don't lose your compass. I'll never forget it. And we won. So the Skittles worked.
Worked twice. That's awesome. It's good to get that grounding, I think, no question about it. You write a good bit about being a servant leader, the 1970 essay bearing the same title. And you talk a little bit about your Afghan partners and some individuals in particular that you thought representative of the idea, and how much that has meant to you and guided you. Can you share a story with us about how that informed servant leadership for you?
Well, you know, Yeah, I write about that, and I also write about loyalty. And when you're building these kind of bonds in combat, they transcend, I think, nationality in many ways and truly go to character. And what I contrast is I talk about one of my interpreters, Spartacus, who learned English by listening to rap songs and watching movies. So he would string along a series of cuss words that just never quite made sense. But this kid loved America. He loved our values. He hated the Taliban and Al-Qaeda to his core. They had killed one of his brothers, denied his sister's education, and was determined not only to fight with us for that flag, but to die with us if necessary. Unfortunately, the Taliban got a hold of him one day. He was visiting home. They marched him back to his village and beheaded him in front of his family, and to send a message to that tribe and that village. So you think of that, and then I contrast that with Bo Bergdahl. If you remember him, some of our younger folks may not, from 10 years ago, but this was an American sergeant who decided he didn't like America, didn't like what we were doing there, and he didn't just desert his base, as he's since told the story. He defected to the Taliban, and we're helping them with our tactics, techniques, and procedures, and was freed. I'll never forget waking up one morning and seeing Obama standing in the Rose Garden next to his parents, Susan Rice is declaring him a hero, said he served with honor and distinction in all the Sunday talk shows, and we traded 5 of the most senior Taliban in Guantanamo Bay for this one traitor, Bo Bergdahl. One of those Taliban right now their senior military commander running their government. But you want to talk about an ultimate betrayal. The unit next to mine, the conventional unit, lost 6 soldiers looking for him, going into places they wouldn't have been but for looking for him. And despite the fact that we knew at the time that he had deserted, he stacked up his gear, he emailed his dad denouncing America, and walked off his base and went to the Taliban, we still pulled out all the stops. You never leave a fellow American behind, even one that's betrayed you. Unfortunately, they got him off to Pakistan where we couldn't get him. And we also knew he would be tremendous propaganda value to them, which he was in jihadi circles. But contrasting that was an American soldier who absolutely betrayed us, and an Afghan who was absolutely loyal to us and our values. And you extrapolate that, and I think hopefully that explains why so many veterans, and especially in the Green Beret community where we were so embedded, have been so morally injured with how the Afghanistan withdrawal was done. Can't let it go. I mean, I talked to one who has exhausted his entire life savings and his kids' 529 plans, keeping his Afghans alive that are still over there being hunted right now by the Taliban. He can't not answer his phone, right? He can't just cut them off and leave them to their death. And that kind of loyalty, and that feeds into obviously being a servant leader, is, I think, something that's not unique to Green Berets, but certainly because we're so often dependent, and you have to have a level of trust because there's only a couple of us with our partner force, is something I talk quite a bit about.
Yeah, it's something our predecessors did with the Monyards and with the Hmong tribesmen, and before that, Kachin tribesmen. So the bond you develop in working by, with, and through partners, again, is something you can't leave behind. And it is painful to watch what's happened since, and we'll hope for better days. Last question, sort of bring all of this together. And what I think the book effectively does, in ways that others don't, is how all of these principles applied can confront the challenges. And we face some challenges. And it hasn't escaped our attention here. There's an election that's coming up in 2 weeks, and there are consequences associated with it, and a very stark choice. We confront some really difficult challenges. All of the principles you mentioned here have to be applied to confront them. In your mind, what is the logical path for us to apply these principles and confront these challenges effectively?
Well, it really is, I think, a combination of all these principles and having the judgment to know, like, when to apply them. And despite all the rhetoric out there about President Trump, I think his record speaks for itself, and the more I've gotten to know the man, the more I deeply appreciate how many of these, I mean, you talk about resilience and what's been thrown at him, how he could have walked away from this and a successful one-term president, or determination, or he really does, despite the rhetoric that he just kind of dictates what he wants, he demonstrates. I have a chapter on bottoms-up leadership. He listens. Some would argue he listens too much. But he is constantly soliciting opinions for those that he feels are experts or closest to the issue. And then one in there, I'll just give you that kind of dichotomy and having to know the difference. I talk about restraint in the first chapter. And the story I tell to illustrate it is actually we were under mortar fire, and one of my snipers found the spotter through his scope. The spotter was a 10-year-old little boy. And another mortar round came in every time he picked up his cell phone, and pretty soon my sniper asked for permission to take him out. And he was, for our shooters in the crowd, it was a 50 cal Barrett. It would have split this kid in half. And I denied him permission. I'm thinking of my own kids, and it's just going through your mind in a matter of seconds. The law of war, rules of engagement, is a cell phone a weapon? Arguably it was, but I denied him permission, told him fire the warning shot. The kid runs off into his village. We followed him in, and it turned out the Taliban had been there that morning and lined up every family and said, give us your oldest son to go attack the Americans or else. One family refused. They hung their little boy. And just, I tell that story in the sense that I think restraint was the right option, the right choice in those seconds. But if I were sitting in the living room of one of my Green Berets that had been killed by one of those mortar rounds and had to explain to them that I didn't, authorize the shot, I don't know. And then I give historical examples, Grant with Lee and the restraint that he showed, H.W. Bush not going all the way to Baghdad, stopping in Kuwait despite a lot of criticism at the time, or even unsung heroes. There's a Soviet submarine captain, Vasily Andropov, who during the Cuban Missile Crisis was ordered to fire a nuclear-tipped torpedo into the U.S. Navy that was blockading Cuba in 1962. He refused, thank God, because it would have set off World War III, despite the fact he ended up going to the Gulag, a Soviet Gulag in Siberia. Restraint is often the right option, and then take that full circle, and I'll stop, to President Trump. Let's go back to Iran. International shipping attacked. He didn't authorize a military response. Saudi Aramco hit with cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. International oil supply, still didn't. Shot down our drone, still didn't. Stormed our embassy and killed an American, okay. But did we bomb Tehran? No, we took out Soleimani, a targeted strike with strategic effect and no collateral damage, right? So that was, I think, a combination of restraint, and then a bold application, but right application of power. And I talk about that, at the times the need to be bold in there as well. So that was a long, convoluted, I don't want to say Kamala Harris, but type of answer, but in the sense of there's not a clean answer. There's a series of attributes that I think one has to have or be aware of, and then the judgment, the experience, the wisdom to know when to apply what. And that has to be rooted in what I believe, both the moral, personal, and kind of political philosophy, and which I think Heritage certainly has, the America First movement certainly has, and I think what you're going to see, to bring it to your point in the campaign, a lot of people questioning what is what she has. She's running from a record, but what is she running towards? And she hasn't been able to answer that question. We'll see how that bears out on November 5th.
We will indeed. We've just scratched the surface of what I hope all of you will find in a really superb book with some important lessons that I think will guide, and I hope will guide us as we confront the challenges, as Mike's been kind enough to relay in his book. And I think those lessons all bear attention. And again, encourage you to get the book, encourage you to read it, and hopefully it will inform and guide. And hopefully you can be as successful as what I think is the most successful member of Congress right now, who's done some really tremendous things before, during, and now in his current position, and we look forward to seeing what he'll be doing in the future. Extremely grateful for the time and attention you've given us here,
thank you.
and we look forward to having you back whenever you can.
Yeah, man.
Please help
No,
join me in thanking
Heritage.
Representative
I
Waltz.
appreciate it. Thanks. Thank you, buddy.
He's got a few minutes before his next engagement, so for those of you that would like a signed copy, he's graciously
Happy to.
agreed to do so
Sure.
for the next couple of minutes. So please feel free to form a line, and we'll get through as soon as we practically can.